I'm very excited that Lauren Gustus is joining us. She's the executive editor of the Salt Lake Tribune. I myself am a former Salt Lake Tribune employee. I worked there for about 13 years. Lauren and I kept missing each other in our various stints there, but I can tell you with absolute certainty that the Salt Lake Tribune is under wonderful leadership now, and I'm very excited to have her joining us here. She became the executive editor of the Salt Lake Tribune in December of 2020. The Tribune is the first major metro newspaper in the country to become a nonprofit. It achieved sustainability under Lauren's leadership in 2021. In 2022, the Tribune became the founding member of the Great Salt Lake Collaborative, a group of 23 organizations focused on elevating solutions to the lake's challenges. It also shares its daily reporting with journalism partners throughout the state through the Utah News Collaborative. In 2023, the Moab Times Independent donated itself to the Tribune, saving that newspaper. It is my great pleasure to welcome Lauren to the stage. She's going to be talking about the great work they're doing right here to protect local journalism.
Thanks, Jeremy. I know the banners say that we're talking global diplomacy today, but I'm really excited to talk local. That's what I know best. So I hope you don't mind if we spend some time on that. As we get going, I'm interested in understanding, just quickly, show of hands, how many of you are from Utah or live in Utah, not from Utah? We just had that conversation. Great. How many of you knew that the Tribune was a nonprofit? Okay, that's pretty good. Trent is here from the Tribune. Thank you, Trent. And anyone subscribe to newsletters or to the Trib? Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for subscribing. It's a big deal to us, and I'll share a little bit about why here as we get going. So this is just a little bit of a timeline of the Tribune's more recent history. We were owned by, at one period in time, a hedge fund, one of the worst as it pertains to hedge funds that own local journalism outfits, which is actually a thing. Many of them are owned by hedge funds now. And in 2016, Paul Huntsman purchased the Tribune from the hedge fund. He became the first to extract a newspaper from this hedge fund, Alden Global Capital, which is a fairly impressive feat in and of itself. And at the same time, he realized, successful businessman that he was, it's not easy to run a newspaper. And there were some complicating factors that had to do with the JOA, Joint Operating Agreement, with the Tribune and the Deseret News, which you can ask me about later if you like. I'll save time for questions. But in any event, he decided that he would try to turn the Tribune into a nonprofit. He knew there were a lot of people like you who cared about local news here, and he made that transition with support from the IRS in 2019. When we became a nonprofit, the day we got the letter from the IRS, nothing was really different. We still woke up, had our morning news meeting, decided which stories we were going to share that day, and moved on with, the business of the day. And I would say it took us some time to figure out what it meant to be a nonprofit and how we would work differently, how we would serve our community differently as a nonprofit, right? And so that piece of paper arrived, but it took some time for us to transition to where we are now, and I think we'll continue to evolve. We're certainly in a business that is ever changing. I wanted to spend a minute, and I just got to make sure I'm on the same page because I really can't see where we're at. Perfect, good, okay. To share some insight with you with respect to what happens when there is an absence of local news. There's a historian, his name is David Snyder, and he wrote for the New York Times in this big long piece about local journalism that truth defends itself particularly poorly when there's not very much of it around, right? So what does this look like locally? I want to share just a quick story about a story that we published last week out of Vineyard City, which is right on Utah Lake, Some people are nodding, they know where it is. Others, I'm sure, would have to look at a map. It's a tiny city. It's about 14,000 people, relatively new, recently incorporated. And the Tribune reported last week that the new mayor of Vineyard City had spent hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars to take her and her staff to Paris and to London and to the Ukraine and to India to try to bring business back to Vineyard City. She had no permissions to do this. She didn't ask for the money explicitly in any city council meeting. And the way that it works out was that they had spent $12 for every Vineyard City resident to go on this overseas trip, fancy hotels, you name it. And so far, we haven't found one business from Paris that has relocated to Vineyard City. We'll keep you posted. We'll let you know if it happens. And my point is, that money could have been adjudicated far differently if the public was involved, right? I'm not sure that the public would have placed the same priority on that trip to London that the mayor did, right? And so we've opened some eyes in Vineyard, and I would imagine that moving forward, a lot more folks will pay a lot more attention to what's happening in that community. So I'll spend just a minute on how things have been changing at the Tribune. One of the things that was really important to us was that we tried to reach people in places where we hadn't historically made investments. And we'll do this again in the 2024 election, but what you're looking at on screen is a special section of voter guide that we published in Spanish. We moved it into locations on the west side of Salt Lake City. Jessica, who's here, she's our development director, went out to find it, I believe, on election day, and she couldn't find a single copy, which was great. That meant, it was picked up. People saw it, and people wanted it. That was a big learning opportunity for us. So ahead of this election, we've done listening sessions with 2,500 Utahns, both in survey and in real sit-down live time, to understand what's important to them. And we'll create over 100 unique or individual voter guides for races throughout the state that reflect the priorities that people shared with us in that survey, right? So the voter guide won't be your politician telling you how they feel about immigration, which may be important to you, maybe not. It'll be focused on the issues that Utahns told us they wanted to talk about: air quality, K-12 education, the cost of living in their communities, right? And so we're going to hold prospective electeds to account by asking them what Utahns care about versus what is the script or what are the platform issues that they want to engage in. We've also spent a lot of time investing on social. The future of TikTok is uncertain, but the Tribune is there for now. And that's because there are a heck of a lot of people who get their news and information on these platforms, right? If you have kids, you probably have kids on TikTok if they have a phone, right? Or Instagram. Last year, the Tribune reached 44 million people on Instagram. Obviously, these are multiples, right? So anyone remember how many people live in Utah? It's like, yes, 3.3 million, 3.5 million, right? So we're talking multiples, but at the same time, it's a priority for us as a nonprofit to share our journalism in as many spaces and places as possible. So, in essence, the people who choose to subscribe to the Tribune are subsidizing this work such that those who may not yet be engaged in paying for local news are still getting quality local news. Make sure I'm moving in the right direction here. Forgive me. Jeremy mentioned this, as he was introducing me. One of the other things that we prioritized as we made the shift to nonprofit was collaboration. To my knowledge, we had never published anything from the Deseret News in the Tribune. And the Deseret News had never published anything from the Tribune, right? Did I get that right? You know what I'm trying to say. And in this collaborative here, the Great Salt Lake Collaborative changed that. A bunch of news organizations got together. Let's focus on solutions. How can we elevate this conversation such that we can put more water back in the lake? And to date, the Great Salt Lake Collaborative is 3 years old, Lawmakers have invested, and I failed to update this slide, 10x that figure, $1 billion in the lake, right? So a lot of progress there. We're working in the Utah News Collaborative, sharing daily news out of the Capitol with smaller news organizations across the state. So for example, Millard, Tooele, Park City, they're not going to get down to the legislature during session. We are there. We share that reporting with them on a daily basis. And just today, we launched another collaborative. The picture you see here is from the Colorado River. And we are partnering with 9 other news organizations to do the same thing that we did on the lake, which is to bring awareness to the Colorado, shortages, availability, conservation, how we can do better there, given issues that we have and that the 6 other states in the Colorado River watershed are also experiencing. So we're excited to see where that goes. Just launched today. We also talked a little bit about this. As we've thought about our mission and where we can be helpful, we've taken on stewardship of a local newspaper down in Moab. This paper had been owned by the same family for over 100 years. It's the Taylor family. If you've ever been down to Moab, spent some time there. They have offices right off Center Street. Moab, small town, Center Street's like the second main street, right? And Zane Taylor was the publisher of this paper before his family decided to donate it to the Tribune. And Zane hadn't taken a vacation in over 30 years. And that's because he was running the printing press on Center Street every week. Every week the paper got out because Zane showed up and Zane made it happen. So they're very happy to be liberated from that responsibility. I believe Zane is on a motorcycle trip right now, enjoying his time and freedom. And we've taken on the production aspects, but left the news gathering to Moab because they know best. We did make it free to everyone in town, which is a significant shift. It used to be a paid-for product, but now everybody has access to it, which is certainly a goal for the Tribune too. We just have a lot more revenues attached to our subscriber base such that we can't get there just yet. But the most important thing that the Tribune has done and will continue to do is to publish impact journalism. I'm not sure if anyone remembers this story from back in the fall, but the Tribune was the first to report on Sean Reyes's travel. Sean Reyes was shooting feral hogs out of a helicopter in Texas. He was making trips internationally. He was paying for a membership at Max Club. Anyone ever been there? If you have, I want to talk to you. Downtown, it's a private club. And he did it with money from his campaign, right? So he wasn't using taxpayer money. But what he was doing was spending a heck of a lot of time on the road working in his own interest versus in the interest of Utahns, right? He's our AG. There's a lot to get done, you know. And so we grammared or made an open records request for his calendar. You may have followed this too. And he denied it. We went in front of the committee. The committee said it should be public. You should give it to him. He sued KSL, and we joined this brief with KSL to defend the decision that the Records Committee had made that the calendar should be released. And in the interim, the legislature stepped in and said, all public officials' calendars are not public. So we now have a law that states that you cannot access the calendars of elected officials here in Utah. Okay? So we'll never know, right? We may know here because this happened before the law was passed, but we'll never know, you know, short of that law being changed, what our public officials are doing on your time. That's why we need local journalism, right? We have some workarounds. I'm not going to share them with you. I think there's still hope, but my goodness, you know, lawmakers cutting off access to public calendars is outrageous, in my opinion. We talked a little bit about Vineyard already. Before Vineyard, there was a plan to build islands in Utah Lake. Anyone remember that? Yeah, okay. Who's happy? That's not happening anymore. And I think there was thorough reporting by a number of news organizations with respect to the shenanigans, if you will, that we saw down in Utah Lake. But the Tribune reported specifically on a number of, oh, did I not hit go? Yeah, I didn't. I'm so sorry. Huh. Thank you. I've just been going backwards. All right, there's Sean. You saw his face. Okay. And here's our lake stories. Yeah. That's what Sean looks like in the event that no one... Okay, so the private company that was trying to start these lakes up went into bankruptcy, really mismanaged, promised all kinds of federal support for the program. $893 million was coming from the EPA. Allegedly, it was never coming. Spencer Cox was about one day from standing on the shores of Utah Lake and saying, we got this money. It never existed. The feds were never going to give it to Utah. And some of my favorite reporting was on the gifts that the CEO of the company bestowed upon his family. He gave his brother $75,000 for consulting work. He paid his son $3,000 for a 3-week internship to work for him. I mean, just again, massive, massive, I would say, corruption around public funds and how public funds are supposed to be sent. So that's where I think the Tribune excels and spends a good bit of its time constructively. I'm going to move into the election and then happy to take any questions that you have because I feel like this election is really important. And I think people think it's important because Donald Trump is running against Joe Biden, but that's not why I think it's important, right? How many of you know who's running for state school board in your district? You know? Okay, good, nice. You are like the smartest people in Utah. Yeah. Many people don't, right? Many people don't have that information. How can we create spaces and places where they can have access to it? We want to move our 100 plus voter guides across social media platforms so they're easy to discover and they're easy to consume, right? Not a lot of words, graphic heavy. How do we make it pretty, attractive, you know, something that a thumb or a finger would want to stop on? And how do we partner with others such that we can make as much of this reporting as free as possible? So 2024 reporting free at the Tribune thanks to support from donors and others, and hopefully, again, in as many spaces and places as possible so people can find it and can start to be activated around what's happening in their communities. Why does this matter? There are a whole bunch of outfits out there that are trying to pass themselves off as news outlets, entities, websites. I don't even know what to call them. Anyone heard the term pink slime? Okay, I'm told that in Utah that was also like a lunch meat, but what I'm talking about is a site that's created deliberately to deliver misinformation, right? And there's a whole network of them, and they exist here in Utah. Oh, I did it again, huh? No? Yeah, okay, there we are. It's just Sean again. This is one of the pink slime sites that exists here in Utah. It's run by Metric Media, which is an outfit out of Chicago that's principally controlled by Republican PAC money. And it will deliver AI or computer-generated news, or it will grab from other places, and it kind of sits dormant until the election, and then it starts to flood, quote-unquote, you know, its site with material that is supportive of one side and not the other, right? And if you look at that, it looks fairly normal, right? It doesn't look unlike a news site, right? And so folks will consume it, and they will think it's real, and it is not. It's run, like I said, by a Republican PAC out of Chicago. So this is a look at when you juxtapose, okay, look, we have pink slime. We're also losing news organizations all across the country. Anyone want to take a crack at how many newspapers close each week in the United States? Thank goodness. Not 100, but it's a lot when you add it all up. 2 a week. We are lucky, in my opinion, to have community support at the Tribune that enables us to do the work that we are doing, but we are far from done, and I would say we need your help. So as you think about what's coming up, and maybe as you leave here today and have conversations about what you talk through, I want to highlight just a couple of things here on this slide with respect to knowing what you're looking at, right? I would remind you that the algorithms want you to stay, right? So how do you get out of whatever that doom scroll is that you might be in on social, right? How do you think about what questions you are asking, right? So if you went to your browser of choice and typed in, Trump is a liar, or if you typed in Trump was politically persecuted, you would get two drastically different sets of results, right? So think about how you are characterizing whatever it is that you might be looking for such that you can get a more honest answer, right? Because otherwise pink slime is going to show up. You can always visit a website's About Us page. They should have contact info there. There should be an email and a phone number and a picture and a name of someone, and if there isn't, think twice, right? And then if it seems unusual, I would say, and we ask our reporters to do this all the time, validate. Can you find it somewhere else? If not, you might question whether or not it is, in fact, accurate. This is my last slide, then I'm happy to take any questions you might have. The Tribune's a nonprofit. We are stewarded by the community, so thank you for being engaged. If there are others that you think should be engaged, please find me after or suggest that they subscribe to a free newsletter or check out our election coverage. Again, all of that is free. They can also subscribe. You can donate and help make more of our reporting free come November 4th. But more than anything, just appreciate your time and your willingness to sit with me this afternoon. So thank you. Yeah.
Okay, if anybody has questions, please go to the microphone, or I can also run the microphone around.
Hi. Locally, we have public radio, public TV, and you can still catch all the news on those stations without having to support them, which of course is not good karma, but you can get all the news that you need locally from what they offer. So why is that not part of the Tribune's model as a nonprofit to make all of the news accessible to the local population?
I would respectfully challenge that assumption that you can get everything that you need from public radio.
No, I'm not saying everything, but everything they offer
is free.
Is free.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. It's because for 150 years we did it one way. Mm-hmm. So we had a subscriber and advertiser-based model. And when we shifted, like I said, to nonprofit on day one, it's not as if an endowment magically arrived, right? And so we are still reliant on that subscriber revenue to support all of the initiatives that the Tribune is undertaking. Increasingly, philanthropy is supporting the Tribune, so it's a growing kind of revenue source for us, but we don't have enough of a runway yet to just open it up.
But is that your long-term goal?
That's the goal.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
The advertiser base historically would leverage some pressure occasionally. How are you dealing with that in the philanthropic conversation?
Yeah, sure. I actually don't think they're that different, and folks will ask, well, geez, isn't a donor, shaping that, or, how do you know that there is no influence on? And my response is, we've been doing it for decades. There has been a strong separation in legacy news media between the advertising and the news sides of the business, and we've established a similarly firm line with our philanthropic operation. They don't know what stories are working on. Donors never hear about things in advance, and we tell them up front, you will not influence the journalism. You can support us, but it's written into every agreement that we have, which is to say, your support does not equal influence or play, or even the ability, to, suggest a story that then we will act on. Our editors act on stories that they feel are newsworthy in collaboration with reporters, and that's our process, and that has remained consistent. I'll just add one more thing on that front. We are, I would say, in a fairly strong position as you look at the diversification of that philanthropic bucket, in that the Tribune has over 9,000 people who support it philanthropically. That's a heck of a lot of people to try to please all the time. And so we don't try, right? In that there's no single donor who, if they left or who, if they came, could impact the trajectory of the Tribune financially such that it would be tempting for us to want to go down that road with that donor.
And I've got a lot of questions, but just one more, I promise. Politicians are in Utah refusing to talk to the Trib or withdrawing credentials. How y'all dealing with that?
On a day-by-day basis. No, sincerely, we've just moved through the meat of the convention season for county and city and statewide races. And before every single one of those conventions, we start the dialogue such that we can ensure we have the access we need both for our reporters and our visual team. And so far, folks are reasonable. They understand that, and they, how do I want to say this? They know we'll make a stink publicly, right, if we're not let in. And I would say there's one other component there. Yes, electeds aren't talking to us, how do I want to say this, publicly, and there are plenty of things that they would like to inform us of off the record that then serve as leads and can be very directional as we think about the reporting that we want to do. So in a different capacity, let me frame it this way. We have a lot of reporters at the Tribune that are very well sourced, which I'm happy about.
Would you talk a little bit about your staffing? I mean, I think you make a strong argument. I'm fully supportive that we need more local reporting and down deep in
Yes.
the local.
Yeah.
But that's hard to do. So talk about your staff. What would you see as an ideal staff size? I know that's a hard one.
Yeah.
But also, what about the role maybe, because I keep struggling, how can we challenge, what about citizen journalism? Is there a role for that?
Thank you. That's a great question. So I'll just go back to Vineyard. Obviously, we don't have a beat reporter in Vineyard, right? We had good relationships coming out of Utah Lake such that, we were tipped off to the spending issues that the mayor has. And so in terms of staffing, we try to look at geographic holes and or opportunities. So we've got good coverage, I would say, in Salt Lake Valley. We've invested recently in coverage on the west side. We have new reporter, Jose Davila IV. He's doing great out there, in my opinion. We're down in Moab. We're down in Washington County with one reporter, which is not enough given all the crazy that is coming up down there, but it's a start. We are in Cache Valley in partnership with Utah Public Radio. So we've tried to make strategic investments where there are opportunities and needs, but we still have gaps. We have no one in Davis County, and I think that's a problem because it's the seat of the Senate President, the Speaker of the House, most of the leadership of the LDS Church, and the Great Salt Lake, right? We don't have anyone dedicated to Utah County. Again, that's a problem. It's one of the fastest growing counties in the state. And there's just not a lot of journalism down there. There really isn't in Davis County either. So I haven't really allowed myself to think about what that perfect staffing size is. But it would be tremendously helpful if we had more eyes and ears in some of those communities that I mentioned. Yeah.
Is any coverage of this meeting going to be in the Tribune?
Probably not. Although our photographer Trent is here, maybe there'll be a visual. We get asked to be a lot of places, and
But you are here.
I am here. Yes, it's every day is a prioritization game, right? So we editors meet in a morning news meeting at 9 o'clock, and we determine who we have and where we're going. And there's always more where we need to be's than who we have, right? And so we try to prioritize around where we think, let's say there's harm being done, there's accountability work that needs to be shared, there's high impact to a high number of people, right? And oftentimes what that means is events and conversations and thought starters, which are incredibly valuable for the community that's here, don't make their way in translation to the published or printed product to the extent that they could, 10, 20 years ago. Yeah.
Hi. I was raised in Utah, spent some time back in the state national capital, and then Denver, and then have moved back recently about the time you went from nonprofit. And having just been a resident here, there's still like a view that the Tribune is the liberal,
Sure.
and everything else is more conservative, and especially with the religion behind it and the ownerships of the two papers. How are you competing with that to kind of make sure that your message can reach across that assumption, especially with the idea that yours is a subscription-based, whereas the competitors, maybe you can get the information for free?
Tithing based? Sorry.
Yes.
Since the Tribune's inception, the Tribune has been viewed as the response to the dominant thinking or ideology, right, in the state. And at the same time, we recently did a survey of both non-readers and Tribune readers, and we asked them a bunch of questions about how they felt about the news and so on and so forth. Excuse me. And we asked them where they identified ideologically. And the majority of respondents identified as moderates. And the majority of Trib readers identified as moderates. And so I think, clearly I have a frog in my throat. We have this polar, right, like we automatically bucket people into they're over here or they're over here. And there's a heck of a lot of people in the middle that just want to have a conversation, that just want to know what's happening in their communities. So when we're writing about the Jordan River Trail or, the new use for the firehouse up in Cache Valley, right? Like those stories are nonpartisan. Those are local stories about things that people care about in their community. And so I would say what we're trying to do is share those stories, even as we acknowledge our role is to hold power to account. And in this state, 90% of the power is held by the Republican Party. Yeah. I should probably wrap up because I think I'm already over time, but I appreciate your questions and thank you for making the time for me. Thanks.